This is an expedition journey that spanned over 2 days from 2 different directions to find a certain location we've been searching for, in the highest peaks of the hinterland mountain ranges. The Yowie clans of the Gold Coast Hinterland have a unique form of communication, using sticks and rocks to message each other, and perhaps also humans. Since the early days of the 1990s of the AYR exploring the GC hinterland, it became apparent what areas were currently active due to the signs and symbols left by the hairy man. After spending many years researching much of the GDR along the Australian east coast, it was clear that the GC hinterland clans were more optical with their symbols than any other region we've been involved with. Sticks in the ground, with no surrounding trees to fall from. Sticks in the ground, in pattern forms. Sticks in the ground, making structures. Sticks in the ground only 2 millimeters thick in the feather light, not heavy enough to break through the undergrowth, yet wedged an inch deep. And sticks too thick to break the surface get speared several inches deep. We've tried on many occasions to spear these sticks into the hard ground, yet despite how hard we tried, we couldn't replicate the force required. In fact, we couldn't even break the surface. Often alongside these communication sticks, symbols can be found in different forms. When we locate these signs, we know we've come to the right area, and active right now. From researching the Gold Coast Hinterland in the 1990s to today, I say, welcome to the Stickland Track. We began our journey at the base of Hamstring Hill. Myself and Gary had been to the first peak only once in December and had to turn back near dusk. We knew Stickland Track was somewhere high on the mountain range, but weren't sure exactly where it was. It didn't appear on our electronic map, so it was a case of cutting through the dense scrub and the undergrowth and keep climbing until we found it. The area we entered and the angle we ascended wasn't terrain for the average person to hike. You had to be fit, you needed a reason to be there, and know where you're going. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. We knew that we were more than likely the first people in this range for a very long time. You just don't go there. It wasn't long before the finder of all things began finding all things, including large footprint impressions in the undergrowth. We maintained vigilance as we hiked, paying special attention to any dark patches in the forest ahead of us. At one point, Gary found what we initially thought was a footprint impression, but it was a perfect fit for a fist with distinct knuckle impressions. For a long time, Gary's been practicing his cloaking abilities. Just like that, he's gone. Oh, there he is, and he's getting better. After hiking 40 minutes, the mountain became all the more steep and physically demanding. The higher we went, the steeper it became. Sometimes having to use both our feet and our hands to navigate and steady our balance. It was time to rest. But not before Jacob decided to move a twig out of his way, using his eye.
Stabbed in the eye by a stick, went right into my socket.
Oh. It's just how we roll.
Workers' comp.
We came to our first plateau and respite, but it was short-lived. We still had another 2 peaks to climb. By that stage, Jacob had found 3 leeches in his boot. Then the finder found something interesting.
There's tracks.
An ancient sign left by the pioneering Yowie researchers dating back hundreds of years ago, according to Gary. After completing the further 2 peaks, we finally made it to the Stickland Track, and it was a matter of seconds before we found our first encouraging sign. This is a lightweight stick which would have landed sideways if fallen from a tree. Even if it did spear into the ground, the light weight wouldn't allow it to break through the leaf litter and then an inch or two into the ground. It just wouldn't happen. It's physics. The next sign wasn't far away. This stick was far thicker on the bottom end and too blunt to spear several inches just by falling.
That's it, no, that's not. Maybe it has.
Next to the stick was a footprint measuring about 16 inches.
Toes. Yeah. 16.5 inches.
Further down the track, Jacob finds a feather-light stick as described in the intro that couldn't possibly break through the heavy ground litter and bed itself into the dirt an inch deep. If it fell from a tree, it would simply land softly on its side.
It's a lot easier for me to walk a fire trail than just to go through this sort of bush.
The more we walked, the more apparent of just how currently active this area was. And the more we realised how important it was for us to return for a night expedition. We hadn't seen so many signs in close proximity since Springbrook. They couldn't have waved a flag any higher to say, hey, we're here. A date was set for the night expedition in the following week. From end to end of Stickland, it was over 20 kilometres, both ends being unhospitable and physically draining. That length of such an uphill climb was unrealistic. We'd come up through the gruelling mountainside terrain halfway along this track. It certainly wasn't the kind of hike you'd want to do hauling heavy equipment prior to an expedition. In fact, it wasn't even a hike you'd like to do without equipment. We couldn't get a vehicle on the mountain, and the other 3 alternatives would have been an unacceptable toll in our bodies. We needed to find a new way in. There had to be another route. Myself and Gary decided to come back in 3 days to find another way in. After pre-planning and studying the topographical maps, myself and Gary arrived mid-Saturday afternoon in the rain. On a hunch, we'd followed a narrow overgrown track through the forest which eventually joined onto a larger trail. It wasn't long before we started to find the same signs as Stickland. Gary decided to wear a stealth sweater he'd knitted that matched his eyes.
Hello again. What we do find on these tracks in Yowie active areas, do they use them for markers? Are they just playing around? Or is it actually communication between the troop? And this is something that we find. So these sticks, branches, often about 4 to 6 inches into the ground, in the middle of the trail, on the sides of the trail, sometimes by themselves. Sometimes there'll be 4, 5, 6 in a row going down the middle of the trail, down the side of the trail. Is it a marker for them as a sign of communication, or is it them just playing around?
If anyone is sceptical about all these stick signs, perhaps day 3 of this video may shed some light on the subject. Yes, they do fall from trees and they do get caught in the ground, sure. But this is something different and you had to be there to appreciate it. Only metres away from the last stick sign, we discovered a fresh bird kill.
There's still a fair bit of meat left on that, to be honest. Here's your kill site. He's found here. Here's your one of the feet. This would appear to be the neck, I'd imagine. Backbone. Still with a few organs on it.
At one stage we cut back through the forest in search of Stickland Track to the north. Gary was stressed to blend into his surroundings like a chameleon. Unfortunately, there are no rose gardens in sight. Hiking along a new track and heading in the right direction, we were finding more and more sticks in the ground. A short bent stick won't spear vertically into the ground. Again, it's called physics, and it doesn't weigh enough to make an impact through the leaf litter. It was at this stage we believed we were in fact on Stickland Track.
A right hand footprint. So right here, you see, quite a deep impression there as well.
It is.
Yeah, we're probably looking around 13, 14, possibly 15-inch size track. What is it about?
By now, after finding familiar landmarks and checking the maps, it was confirmed that we had arrived. We were at the right location, and it was a lot easier than the previous hike.
Location that we feel that it's that dense, that mysterious, that creepy. It's like a Jurassic Park and T-Rex come bursting out of the bush. This is a good one. Right here. Nice and strong. There is no way that is going to fall from the tree and do that naturally. Soldier on, we have dinosaur eggs to find. Let's go.
Just follow Jesus here.
It was now the journey back to the vehicles and it was about to get dark. The next stage was to plan for the overnight expedition. In the past 12 to 24 months, the AYR has been busier with reported sightings than ever before. Witnesses coming forward and having their voices heard in our audio reports has given others the courage and inspiration to tell their stories, including an unprecedented amount of Indigenous First Nations people. Thankfully, Sarah Bignell came on board, taking time away from her own radio show to now conduct most of our witness interviews. Over the last 12 months, AYR has become more active in the hinterland of southeast Queensland. As I say, it's a numbers game. The more you're out there, the more chance of encounters and sightings you have. We've had various daytime photos that we've taken ourselves, including this one coming down the hill towards Buck, and many more sent by other people. But the thermal camera equals the playing field at night. This image I shot in the Diagula National Park a few months ago. It was taken with the aging fleur. We first heard it walking down the hill by Peterlee. With the fleur, I saw it standing in the open next to the tree as it watched me, before stepping sideways behind the tree and then peering back around at least 3 times. Despite physically witnessing the Yowie and returning the following day to measure the height to be 8 to 9 feet, you'll always have the minority of armchair wallies saying it must be a possum, because sometimes the truth is inconvenient to their cause. Up until recently, we only had the one handheld FLIR thermal camera. This all changed 6 months ago when we introduced a newer and more modern model. This has proved to be a game changer. On our very first night, Gary captured these images from Springbrook as they walked down the hill under the cloak of darkness, or so they thought. Tonight, it's Buck's first time with a second new thermal camera. Although there's a lot of operator error involved, due to never using the camera before, he still manages to step it up a notch in terms of footage. Tonight's team consisted of Buck, Shannon, Gary and myself. We hauled most of the gear in by trolley, which looks easier than it was when we encountered hills. Dusk was upon us quickly. We were on the border of an expansive area of private property, and due to mutual friends, we were fortunate enough to be granted permission to camp. Because of the recent rain, the leeches and ticks were out in full force, so we had to sleep off the ground. Not exactly Yowie proof, but better to be aware of what's around you during the night rather than laying in a tent, blind to the noises outside. That's not a pleasant experience when you have a couple of lurkers during the night. This way we can pan around with a thermal or NV when we feel the need. The location had a creepy vibe. Everything became quiet and still. It felt as though there was something watching us, something there. With the sleeping arrangement set up, it was time for dinner and a chat before we began operations. The leeches heard a rumour that we'd arrived, and they sent a welcoming party. It was time to check our boots. There's over 500 species of leeches around the world, all a part of the worm family, and some can live to be over 10 years old. The Australian leeches at the top end can stretch themselves to 8 inches or 20 centimetres. They inject you with anaesthetic at first so you can't feel the bite and then suck your blood. After dinner, while talking, we began to hear noises around the camp. Buck had a quick lesson from Gary on how to operate the latest thermal, and he left camp to practice. Gary and Shannon went to the other side of the outskirts of camp for a pan with their camera. We all wore earpieces for radio silence. At roughly 11 p.m, Buck came on the radio saying he'd had something in his sights and it was watching him.
He said it's looking at him, has big eyes in a human form, so with a bit of luck.
After some two-way chat between Gary and Buck, Gary and Shannon headed slowly towards Buck. Then Gary returned with some news.
Buck is roughly about 60 metres up the trail. He has been watching something for, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes now. This does appear to have a human-shaped figure. He can see eye shine through the thermal as well. This figure is poking its head around the tree, looking at him, but physically watching what he's doing.
Soon after, Buck announced he was heading back to camp.
Some type of big stump, and I found that image again. This time it was closer. It got up and had like a human shaped figure. And when Gary said he was coming towards me, and he said he was about 20 meters away, it looked in that direction, and then it just took off so quietly. So I don't fully understand what I saw, but it was high strange. It was very odd.
Buck had captured footage, and we're all eager to see exactly what it was he had on the camera. There was a little bit of nervous tension as Gary Wi-Fi'd the footage from the camera to his phone for all of us to see.
It's good. You can actually see.
Yes. Yes, I do see something.
Just like he said, Dan. One's there.
Stop smiling, Dan. I'm trying to compose myself.
Then, the confirmation.
Oh wow, that was the best shot. Wow.
There's no question.
See? Look at that.
Ooh.
Face.
Oh,
That's me.
Oh.
Two.
of them.
Two.
Shoulders and head.
And then I flip back, I get it into...
Whoa. What? You're kidding me.
You cheeky bastard.
Done.
That's clear as day.
Beginner's luck.
I told you that's how we do it. Don't we, now
Just
we have to send Shannon out now.
Yes, it's your turn.
I don't think it is, because you...
No,
Then
that's in behind. You can see the size of the shoulders and the head.
Yeah.
So if you come back, because it's about here, I'll go back halfway.
Yeah, because that's me looking around. Then I find a stump. See that stump?
Yep.
There's something there crawling along.
Yep.
But we still haven't seen the...
Here we go. There it is. See, pick something up off the ground. There's two. That's 100% two. That's 100% two.
Oh, that was a good shot there. That was head and shoulders.
It's so close.
Just like what I said to you, Shannon, where there's one, there's another not far away.
Well, they're with each other having coffee.
Just...
How's this going? First night thing with you.
That's what I'm saying, mate.
Holy shit.
This is the lucky fleur. So, go back through all that footage.
Let's look at this footage a little more closely. This here is the first one. This is prior to the two that came out behind the tree. Now this is doing what Yowies do. They hug a tree, pretend they're a part of a tree if there's a human in the area, and they just blend. So you can see him just putting his head into the tree, and he has his arms around it. Pretending to be one. So at night time you wouldn't be able to see him. You see his arm there around the tree. You can see his face looking at Buck. Looking directly at Buck. But in the night you wouldn't be able to see him. Now these things made no noise at the time. The only reason Buck captured this footage is because he was panning. You can definitely see there that he'd put his arm around it. He'd rested his head into the side. Now he's behind the tree or the stump. He's looking around. And now we're to the second stage. And I'll let Buck take over and explain what's going on here.
After 20 minutes, I find some action going on around the stump, and it's peculiar. So I need to zoom in. And the way these videos work is you need to stop videoing and then zoom in or zoom out and start videoing again. Two giant creatures emerge from the foliage, and one is bending down to pick up something. I immediately let the team know what I'm seeing, something human-like and big in the bushes. I'm also trying now, because it's filled up my monitor, to zoom back. In the excitement, I've forgotten you need to switch off. So the button I'm pressing now doesn't zoom back. It just cascades through all these filters, and it's frustrating. And I finally get it back onto the iron setting, and then I'm going to zoom out because I can't see much. And I stop. And at the same time I stop, Gary says, "I'm coming up to you, mate." And whatever they were, they looked in Gary's direction and just took off. And that was it. There wasn't much more to get, and I really wish that I'd just held my nerve a bit and trusted that the camera was going to capture whatever it was and not try to zoom back out. Very frustrating.
Thanks, Buck. I note in this video that there's two, obviously. If you look closely, particularly if you're on our end and you have the original footage, you can see that one has its back to the other. So therefore, the one that is reaching out is looking towards camp. The other one standing behind it has its back to it and is looking in the opposite direction. So he's pretty much got his back. And I think that's how they operate. Like I've always said, where there's one, there's another not too far away. During the night, understandably, I didn't sleep much. I knew the two Yowies wouldn't be too far away, so during the night I was panning around with a flare at every suspicious noise I heard. Not that I could have slept anyway with the two human chainsaws, Buck and Shannon, snoring as they were. It was a relatively peaceful night. We were up by 5:30 in the morning and began to pack. We cooked breakfast before our departure. It was a successful night and we were walking away with the desired result. As with Gary in Springbrook, with his very first use of the new thermal, Buck was the one with the beginner's luck last night. We left camp, heading towards where Buck was taking his footage. And then, another big surprise. The sticks and the symbols we've been showing you in the past expedition videos from the Springbrook area, and the footage shown earlier here, are more than a simple coincidence. When we arrived at camp last night, there were no signs or sticks. The path was clear. On the way out, exactly where Buck had taken the footage. This stick was right in the middle of the track and pushed in several inches. There was no wind last night. This bizarre looking stick, remember the laws of physics, could not have fallen straight, and it was too light to dig in the way it was at a straight angle. And where did it even come from? It didn't match the surrounding trees. This symbol had been physically broken to the shape it was in and placed in the middle of the track. The X marker, which we all know too well, had no trees above it. I'll state that again. The X marker had no trees or branches anywhere near above it. The sky was clear. All of these signs were together and where Buck was standing. They were strategically placed across the track so we couldn't miss them. They were placed there between 1 and 6 a.m, a 5-hour window. And again, they were not there when we entered camp the night prior. This was the icing on the cake. But what do they mean? Is it a warning to their own kind there's humans camping around the next corner? Was it a message to us to say, we are here? Was it a get out or a welcome? Were they trying to spell Yowie? We hope we brought some weight to the table in regards to these signs. We hope you found some value in the footage of the Yowies. We hope you enjoyed our expedition video. We'd like to thank you all for your continued support and encouragement over the years. Until next time, keep an open mind and an awareness of what's around you while in the Australian bush.